Gojo, Gojo and Teen Gojo. Not only is Gojo the quote-unquote strongest in the main series, in all his iterations in Phantom Parade, he is usually one of, if not the strongest unit of his typing. So in this video I'm going to compare and contrast the three Gojo units and determine which is the best, or at least determine which Gojos are best at doing what. However, as you can probably tell given the thumbnail and intro I'm saying now, I will not be discussing Red Domain Gojo. He isn't on global yet, it's as simple as that. But with that out of the way, let's talk about these three Gojos and find out which is the best. I'll pull up each of their kits and discuss as such, but obviously this goes without saying, if I had to rank them, they'd all be in S tier, obviously. But before we talk about their main skills, let's talk about something that two of the three Gojos suffer from, which is a major drawback: their turn limit. Both Blue Gojo and Green Gojo / Hollow Purple Gojo suffer from a 7-turn limit. After these 7 turns are up, they are forced to leave the field. This counts as losing a character, so in content that wants you to survive without losing a member of your team, this isn't ideal. This restriction is further exacerbated by Hollow Purple Gojo, because his ultimate skill can cut this 7-turn limit even shorter. I'll discuss all three together later, but when Green Gojo's ultimate, obviously his Hollow Purple, when that's used, he will leave as soon as that turn is over. So if the enemy survives the ultimate, he won't be in the turn afterwards. Teen Gojo has none of these limitations. He can stay on the field for as long as he's alive. However, unlike his two adult counterparts, he doesn't have their constantly active Limitless to compensate for their limited time on the field. He has it active for a few turns, but it needs to be reapplied with his skill 2 once it runs out. Furthermore, if he takes damage whilst the Limitless is active, Teen Gojo takes extra damage, but his auto skill gives him a little 5% damage buff to compensate for that, which is nice. Blue and Green Gojo, however, are practically invincible. When they're on the field, the only thing that can damage them are pretty much Domains, Toji and Miguel. Their HP stats are really high, like reaching over 40,000, which is insane. So even if they do get hit by a few random attacks, which has a ridiculously low chance of happening to begin with, unless you're severely underleveled for the content you're doing, these Gojos won't die even inside a domain. With that being said, however, it doesn't mean Teen Gojo is dying every mission, okay? You will have the Limitless active most of the time. It's just annoying that you have to waste a turn every so often to reactivate it. Other little things when looking at these units, the adult variants can Black Flash with their physical attacks. That's Blue Gojo's skill 2 and Green Gojo's skill 1. Both of these can Black Flash, and on top of that, the stat buff given to each unit when they Black Flash is pretty much the same. They get a 25% increase to crit rate. However, Green Gojo just gets it for 1 turn extra than the Blue Gojo, so his Black Flash effect is slightly better. Teen Gojo, no Black Flashes allowed. However, he does get a significant buff when he crits. Whenever Teen Gojo crits, he gets a 10% buff to his damage for 5 turns, which is pretty clean. Not much to say regarding these units' auto skills that I haven't said before in a previous video. Other things to note before the direct comparisons between each skill. All three Gojos only use 1 cursed energy per turn at most, so they're always going to be able to use whatever skills they want, barring their ultimate skill of course, since every skill they use, as I say, either costs 0 cursed energy or 1 cursed energy, so they'll always have enough. One quick comparison however, both Green Gojo and Blue Gojo have the same exact stats, barring their ult charge, which Hollow Purple Gojo obviously has a larger ultimate gauge, so it takes him a little bit longer. Meaning whilst Hollow Purple may do more damage with his ultimate, you can launch multiple reds with Blue Gojo during the 7 turns, whilst you can't do that with Hollow Purple Gojo. So with that being said, with all that gone through, let's get down and dirty and discuss their actual kits. Now, all three Gojos obviously have very similar kits, but they differ in very important ways. They all have 1 close range physical attack and 1 range Jujutsu attack, and 1 buff / debuff. So let's compare each of their attack in that format. Physical, ranged, buff / debuff, and then their ultimate. Now let's compare each Gojo's close ranged physical attacks, those of which being Blue Gojo's skill 2, Hollow Purple Gojo's skill 1, and Teen Gojo's skill 1. Out of all of these, overall I'd say the weakest is very much adult Blue Gojo's, given the fact that his appears to do the least amount of damage of the 3. It has the lowest crit rate. I'll be judging all of these at level 10 of course. Yes, it can Black Flash with a 30% chance, which is okay, which gives Gojo a little bit of a buff here, but since it's a flat physical damage with nothing else, no debuffs, no nothing, it is definitely the weakest of the 3 here. Now, the second weakest is Teen Gojo's close range attack. Whilst it isn't strictly physical and deals hybrid damage, its crit rate is 90%, and the big cherry on the cake for this move is the ability to add provocation for a turn, meaning that if you have Limitless active in this procs, you get a free turn. However, it is only a 35% chance that doesn't increase when you increase the skill level of this skill 1. So in my opinion, whilst you can use it against bosses in the Illusionary Tower, for example, to get a 3 turn of buffing, where you don't have to worry about losing a buffer on your team, it isn't consistent enough at landing provocations for it to be a mega broken move, and most bosses have AoEs anyway, so it's kind of pointless to use this attack most most of the time, unless you build an ult charge, you're probably going to use his skill 3 instead. And on top of that, most of the time, in the harder content you're up against, there's more than one enemy as well, which makes this move a little weaker since provocation only works for 1 turn as well. I believe the best out of these close range physical attacks is HP Gojo's skill 1. It deals an absolute brick of physical damage, but it can also Black Flash, has a crit rate of 150, and it debuffs the enemy's physical and Jujutsu damage by 15% for 2 turns. It does the most damage, has the most consistent debuff, and doesn't rely on chance like Teen Gojo's, whilst also being able to Black Flash like Blue Gojo's, and it also crits like it's nobody's business. Let's flip the script, so to speak. Let's look at the character's buffing capabilities, weakest of which being Hollow Purple Gojo's in my opinion. Whilst a 70% increase to your own damage and a 30% increase to damage taken by the enemy is nothing to look down at, it doesn't really stack, and on top of that, there are plenty of bosses that are green typed that are debuff resistant, making half of this skill kind of worthless, and on top of that, it buffs the enemy's damage by 10% as well. Whilst this isn't a game changer, it still takes away from the skill that little bit more. Now, in my opinion, this may be a bit of a controversial take, but I think the number 2 spot for buff slash debuff goes to Teen Gojo, and the main reason I'm not as big of a fan of his buff as I am of Blue Gojo's, which is number 1, which I'll explain why, is that when you're trying to nuke with Teen Gojo, stacking his buff up to 3 times, which is massive, sometimes you may get interrupted by the limitless part of his skill 2. See, if Teen Gojo doesn't have his limitless active, his skill 2 will be mainly focused on reapplying the limitless instead of stacking damage and crit rate. You'll need to be using his skill 2 multiple times in a row to optimize your damage, and then just before you get your ult gauge filled, you need to reapply your limitless, so you miss out on a good chunk of damage. Whilst 80% damage increase that stacks alongside crit rate is absolutely massive. Sometimes it's passive that gives you the limitless will then run out, and it can be really annoying as you have to miss out on potential damage. And this is shown even more due to Teen Gojo's increased ult gauge, so it takes even longer to get his ult, so there's a higher chance that you'll get interrupted by his other skill too. So that's why I think Blue Gojo's is the best buff out of the 3. Whilst it doesn't stack as many times as Teen Gojo's, it won't be interrupted, and because of how much smaller his ult gauge is, by the time you've stacked his buff multiple times, you already have your ult ready to shoot. With Teen Gojo, since his ult takes a longer charge, it's less consistent. Blue Gojo's, a massive 120% buff, is huge, and it gives you a brick of ult charge to boot, so it's the strongest of the 3 buffs in my opinion. Now, they're ranged Jujutsu attacks. Unfortunately, Blue Gojo is back at the bottom in my opinion. Whilst it is of course a brick of damage, I mean actually it does the most out of the 3, that's all it is. Both Hollow Purple Gojo and Teen Gojo add something else. Both of them decrease damage dealt. Hollow Purple Gojo does it for 1 turn and only by 15%, which isn't great, but he also increases his own break damage, which yet again isn't amazing, but it's a nice touch. However, Teen Gojo does a chunk more damage than Hollow Purple Gojo, but it also decreases enemy attack by 30%, and it can stack. A 60% damage decrease to an enemy being applied by a unit that you're going to be nuking with is really strong. You can even use Hanami alongside this, so you can debuff the enemy into the ground where they're consistently hitting 0 for damage. In Illusory Tower, this move is cracked beyond belief. Of course, Teen Gojo wins in the ranged skill category, but let's get into the big guns. Out of all of the moves that we have here, this is what matters most, their ultimate. It goes without saying, if we're looking strictly at damage, Blue Gojo loses here, followed by Teen Gojo and then by Hollow Purple. But I don't think it's as simple as just straight damage. Given the 7-turn time limit, as well as the 1 ultimate restriction for Hollow Purple, on top of some content having the ability to survive / use a resurrection status, it makes Hollow Purple, despite its massive damage numbers, not be the best in my opinion. Granted, it does reduce ult charge by 2 points, which is nice. It's not amazing because as soon as Hollow Purple Gojo leaves, I then have to build up another damage dealer's ult who has just been subbed in, which will take more than 2 turns. Teen Gojo's, whilst also having really strong numbers, has a really high ult charge cost, making it exceedingly rare to land without a rare Inumaki and using memory to make up for the larger ult charge restrictions. Blue Gojo does the least damage, as stated, but if you have the right comp, you can ult several times within the 7 turns. Regarding which is the best and which is the worst, it's kind of hard to determine because they all fit perfectly into each unit's kit. Green is a powerhouse at the cost of removing him from the field. Yellow deals a brick of damage but takes longer to get there. And blue, while still doing a chunk, especially when utilising a stackable buff, can still be seen on the weaker side due to its lower multipliers. But whilst I disagree with that assessment, it still doesn't do as much as the two prior Gojos mentioned, but as a result it can be used multiple times, unlike Hollow Purple. If I had to say which was the best, I'd say in my opinion the Hollow Purple is the strongest out of the three, followed by Blue Gojo's Red, since it can be used consistently and be buffed before use without interruption, unlike Teen Gojo's, and it doesn't take anywhere near as long as Teen Gojo's, but due to Teen Gojo not having a turn restriction and being forced to leave the field, he can use his multiple times as well. It just takes a little bit longer due to the ult requirement. So to be honest, I don't know which one is the best here. They all just kind of fit perfectly into the way their own kit is designed. Quick note about their co-op ultimate effects. They're all pretty mid. They just increase break damage or crit rate or crit damage, not really adding too much. I'd say Hollow Purple's is the best, but obviously he doesn't get the chance to make use of it, which is a bit stupid. But at least whoever you ult with can make use of it, so that's okay. Teen Gojo's is meh, not amazing. Granted, it ties into him landing consistent crits, which is nice and goes well with his passive. Blue Gojo's is just kinda ass. Now let's discuss what memories to use. Use non-standard. Now, I'm just kidding, but, well, not really. The only exception is like Teen Gojo, who can use the Cola memory for a little bit more damage due to his typing, but that's about it. If you don't have non-standard yet, somehow, use adult time or pride. That's all there really is to say in regards to memories. All you want to do with these kinds of characters, specifically nukers, is just increase their ult damage as much as possible, and these are the main memories to do so. In regards to team comps, you can use pretty similar teams for all three of these units. It just depends on who you have in your box. Do you have the specific type debuffer, like Yellow Yaga for Teen Gojo? Do you have Teen Geto for Hollow Purple Gojo? Do you have Blue Inumaki for Blue Gojo? Your team comps will mainly be focused around facilitating more damage for these units, more than anything else. Nuking is the meta, and it will be for a long time. Here's a list of all the units you could use with any of these Gojos, depending on what you have in your box. It's just a list of buffers you can make use of. Blue SSR Momo, Green SR Momo, Red SR Yaga, Green SR Gakuganji, Red SR Nanami, Rare Inumaki, SSR Yellow Megami. As long as the units you're using buff the damage of the Gojo you're using, you're chilling. You should be able to beat the mass majority of content in the game. Keep in mind, though, even if a stage is mono-typed exclusive, like for example in Illusory Tower where all the other units don't do damage, that's fine. You can still use a different typing character for buffs and debuffers most of the time. However, overall, I would argue that yellow teaming, so Teen Gojo's team, is probably the most optimal in the game right now, given the fact that he has Yellow Yaga, Domain Megumi, and Yellow Nanami to buff each other with type-based debuffs and buffs, which is really strong. And in global, at least now, at the moment, yellow is the strongest, but not much else to say regarding team comps. In conclusion, why is the Gojo that shoots red a blue type unit, and the Gojo that uses blue a yellow type unit, and the one that uses purple is neither red or blue? That's some goofy design in my opinion. Overall, however, all these units are obviously S tier, without a doubt, but they aren't made equal. I personally believe that Green Hollow Purple Gojo is the weakest due to his ultimate restriction, and that is pretty much the long and short of it. Being able to ult only once, despite the huge multipliers, which are even higher than a fully leveled up UTET, which is absolutely ridiculous, being able to only do it once is really unfortunate, and it prevents him from doing so much more damage through repeated uses of his ultimate. Then it's followed by Blue Gojo, in my opinion. I think he's the second strongest, as he can launch multiple ultimates and do a brick of damage. Yes, he doesn't debuff the enemy or anything like that, but he does consistent damage to the enemy through his ult multiple times. And then, of course, I'd say Teen Gojo is kind of inarguably the strongest out of them, ironically enough, despite the fact he would canonically be the weakest, due to the fact that he gets some of the invincibility provided by the Limitless without the 7-turn restriction, which is absolutely broken to an insane degree. Like, he can carry you through so much content in this game on his own, strictly due to not just his damage, his debuffs, and his invincibility. Like, it's genuinely insane. To reconfirm, Teen Gojo strongest, then Blue in my opinion, and then Green Gojo / Hollow Purple Gojo. I will say, Blue and Green are very close. They can switch depending on what units get released or whatever to help facilitate a stronger team, but at the moment, currently, I believe Blue Gojo is a little bit stronger. But that's all there is to say. Thank you all for watching. Toodles my doodles, hopefully see you in the next one. Peace.